So we are going to go ahead and get started. Good morning, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Aloni, and I'm with Schneps Media. Schneps Media is the largest local media company in the New York metro area. We publish over 80 newspapers, magazines, websites, webinars, podcasts, and events throughout Manhattan, Queens, Brooklyn, the Bronx, Staten Island, Long Island, the East End, Philadelphia, and even Palm Beach, Florida. But today we are thrilled to be here with you to talk about a very important topic, Medicaid home care versus nursing home care. And I'm pleased to bring you this important topic, and you're going to learn how to qualify for each and which care may be best for you or your loved one. We have extraordinary panelists today, so let me get started and introduce them to you. First, please welcome Melissa Negrin-Wiener. Melissa manages the Government Benefits Department at Cona Elder Law, concentrating her practice in the areas of asset protection, Medicaid eligibility planning, estate planning, special needs planning, mediation, guardianship, and veteran benefits. She supervises the preparation of Medicaid applications for nursing home care, home health care, and community benefits, resolves complex Medicaid issues, and represents families facing a reduction in Medicaid home care hours and services. She's been named a super lawyer and a 2023 best lawyer. Notable achievements include being named to Leadership in Law, Top 50 Women in Business, Outstanding Women in Law, Top Attorney of North America, and Who's Who Women in Professional Services, just to name a few. She's accredited by the Department of Veterans Affairs and was admitted to practice before the United States Supreme Court. So thrilled to have you here, Melissa. Welcome.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Now, please welcome Ken Kern. Ken is partner at Cona Elder Law, and Mr. Kern leads the firm's healthcare reimbursement and recovery department, concentrating his practice in healthcare facility representation, civil litigation, complex Medicaid eligibility matters, fair hearings, Article 78 proceedings, guardianships, and resolution of all issues related to resident financial accounts and healthcare facilities' bottom line. Mr. Kern handles a wide range of complex matters affecting not only healthcare facilities, but older adults and the disabled as well. Welcome, Ken.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
So we are certainly lucky to have these two experts, and I'm excited to dive in. So let's get started with the big question. Share with us the difference between community Medicaid versus nursing home Medicaid.
So I'll start with a little explanation of the community Medicaid program, which many people seem to think is an easier process than a nursing home application or nursing home Medicaid, because the difference of what you're supplying to the Department of Social Services. So home care is for somebody who's living at home who needs assistance with their activities of daily living, like dressing, bathing, grooming, using the bathroom, things like that. But when we apply for Medicaid at a community Medicaid, we only have to give the Department of Social Services 3 months of bank records, as opposed to nursing home Medicaid, where we have to give them 5 years. But the process is difficult in that, after we get the financial piece in order, and right now there's no look back at all for community Medicaid, where there's the 5-year look back for nursing home. We have to then help the client get assessed for how many hours Medicaid's going to cover. Typically, it's not the amount the person needs, so the family's still looking for supplemental, coverage or assistance. And then, as you heard in my bio, people are getting their hours cut, so we have to handle that. And then also the staffing of the care. So once you get the approvals, you need to find an aide, which is becoming more and more difficult. So that's what the community process looks like. And Ken can speak to the nursing home piece.
On the nursing home side, usually what happens, although not all the time, is a person requires a hospitalization, and from there requires rehab. And the rehab takes place in a nursing home. You call it a rehab facility. There's a rehab section, and then there's a long-term care section. And if that person cannot be safely discharged back to the community, then they really have no choice but to segue to long-term care in a nursing home. If that is the case, then a Medicaid application will be filed seeking institutional Medicaid benefits, which is another way of saying nursing home benefits. When we're filing and processing a nursing home application, as Melissa pointed out, we're talking about 5 years of statements, and that's what's referred to as the 5-year look back. So that's 5 years of statements for all accounts that were opened during that 5-year look back, whether they're closed now, and everything has to be documented: where the money went, who got it, where it was transferred to, etc. And if every stitch of documentation is not provided, the local agency will deny the application, which will be a very certainly a hardship for anyone based upon the amount of money that a nursing home costs each month. But the 5-year look back, the transfer penalties, if there's gifts made during that time period, those have to be addressed. So it's a very different animal than home care, but certainly no less complex.
Wow. So they are very different processes. So can you share with us how the planning process is different for the two?
Well, when we sit down with clients to talk about Medicaid planning, people who actually, come in ahead of time and they want to plan. Obviously, we never know what we're planning for, right? It's the old crystal ball thing. So really the planning is kind of the same for both. The idea is you want to move assets out of their names, the individuals, and you want to start that 5-year clock for nursing home Medicaid purposes, because ideally that 5 years is going to come and go without the need for a nursing home. And for home care, right now, and I know there's a question in here, right now there's no look back for home care. So you can move all of your assets today and be eligible the first day of next month. But, for nursing home, you have the 5 years. So if you're planning, right, we're going to look at that 5-year number as kind of our goal. So the planning itself, unless you're in a crisis situation where we need to get on Medicaid now, is really the same for both. You want to move the assets so you'll be eligible for community if and when you need it, and you want to start the 5-year clock for the nursing home piece.
So since you're talking about moving assets, can you share a little bit about how you transfer assets and how to protect your assets from Medicaid?
So planning is going to look a little bit different for everybody, but as a general rule, we typically don't recommend transferring assets to children or other people, okay? We typically will recommend transfers to an irrevocable trust. And the reason for that is when you transfer your assets to somebody else, you lose all of the ability to, when I say control, you do lose some control with an irrevocable trust as well. But when the assets go into somebody else's name, they're then going to be vulnerable to anything going on in that person's life. If they get divorced, if they have creditors, if they have kids in college on financial aid, I could go, if they pass away, if the child predeceases a parent, and then all the assets go to the daughter-in-law or the son-in-law, it really is, there's never really a good reason to transfer to a person. And the irrevocable trust is accomplishing the same thing, getting it out of the person's name, but keeping it in more of a protective shell that can't be, accessed by other people's creditors and things like that.
It's amazing because when speaking to you, like within, the first 5 minutes, I'm like, oh my God, thank God you have to go to a professional, because you can't even think about the things that could be, right? I mean, you just mentioned 10 things that most people wouldn't even think about. Like, okay, I'll transfer the assets to so-and-so and that'll be fine, without thinking about all the potential repercussions. So, thank you for bringing that, bringing that to a front. So the best way to protect your assets is to transfer it. And you recommend doing so to an irrevocable trust as opposed to a person to protect.
Typically, yes. Typically. Once in a while, there's a reason to do it differently.
Okay. Again, everything is going to be specific to the person, and we're going to talk more about the generalities. What about asset and income limitations? How does that come into play with what's available to a person?
Ken, you want to talk about nursing home and then I'll
Certainly.
home care?
So if someone's in a nursing home and applying for Medicaid, their assets have to be at or below $28,133 in order to qualify. All right. If they're above that amount, it either needs to be spent down on their care or they can make an exempt transfer. And there are several exempt transfers that can be made. For instance, if the applicant has a disabled child, any excess resources, money above that $28,000 mark, can be swept over to their disabled child without causing any penalty period. It's not a gift, it's an exempt transfer. Same thing if that person is married. The applicant can sweep over any excess resources to their spouse, and it will not affect their Medicaid eligibility for nursing home benefits. As far as income limits in a nursing home, the applicant's income is budgeted by the Medicaid program. What does that mean? Unlike home care, essentially all of the applicant, a single person, a single applicant for Medicaid, their income will be due to the nursing home, less any insurance premiums, like a supplemental policy for Medicare, and a whopping $50 a month they get to keep for incidentals. So it's called net available monthly income, and that money is paid to the nursing home each month to supplement the cost of their care in the nursing home. All right. If that applicant for nursing home Medicaid is married, then there's the potential that some of their income can be given to the spouse. All right. But that means that the spouse, their income cannot exceed $3,715.50. If it's below that number, then the nursing home resident's income can be sent over to that spouse in the community, bring them up to that number. But if they're working and their income, let's say, exceeds that number, then all of the nursing home resident's income is due to the nursing home.
Thank you for that explanation.
So for home care, same rules apply as far as how much you're allowed to have in your name in order to qualify. But income is treated very differently. So for a single person who's applying for Medicaid, their income cannot exceed $1,677 a month. And there are some questions in the chat and in the Q&A about this. If their income does exceed that amount, and we're talking about Social Security, pension, IRA distributions, income from a trust, if the person has a trust, those are kind of the sources of income we're referring to. So the majority of people do have more than $1,677 in monthly income. They can still go on community Medicaid, but they have to set up something called a pooled income trust, which is a special type of trust that's set up to kind of house that excess income. And from that pooled trust, the money can be used to pay bills on behalf of the Medicaid recipient. So, bills for the home, property taxes, all of the kind of the electric and the water, as long as those bills are in the name of the Medicaid applicant, the money can be used from the pooled trust. So it's a way of really allowing someone to still have access to all of their monthly income and still receive the community Medicaid benefits.
And that pooled income trust would be in the name of the recipient, not of somebody else. So they would still control that money?
No. So the pooled income trust is actually a type of supplemental needs trust that's set up through a not-for-profit. And there are many of them all over the state. The not-for-profit actually is the trustee of the money. And they hold the money in a pool with everybody else who has excess income, and they earmark each individual amount for each of their members, or however you want to refer to them. And then the family will send the bills to the pool trust. So let's say, mom is on community Medicaid and you use a credit card to do her food shopping and clothing and things that she needs. You send that credit card bill to the pool trust each month, and they decide if they're going to pay the bill, which typically we don't have any issues with them paying bills and not paying bills, as long as it's, a relatively realistic bill, not a, gigantic bill to PC Richards or something. and they'll pay directly from the pooled trust. The only kind of thing that we make sure people know is that if mom were to pass away and money is sitting in the pooled trust, so she hasn't used it all, it goes back to the not-for-profit as a donation, essentially, to further their cause. So we do have to be careful when we're doing this, that we don't have somebody who has such a huge excess of income that they're not going to be able to use it. And it might make more sense in those cases for that person to pay privately for home care versus doing the Medicaid application.
So just another layer of things to think about that you can discuss with Ken or Melissa to be able to figure out which is the best place to go for how to work the money to make it make sense. So, you talked about a look back period. Can you just share a little bit more about what that entails and what they're looking back and how extensive that is?
Yeah, I just want to mention one thing, and then I'll let Ken take the nursing home piece of this. Somebody put in the chat that they thought that the law changed to 2.5 years for community Medicaid. Right now, there's no look back. The idea of the change coming down the pike is certainly there. As of right now, it looks like if it happens, it will become effective in the middle of 2024. So obviously planning ahead is the most important thing you can do, but there is no kind of set in stone guarantee that this is going to happen until we're here and it's happening. We should plan like it's going to happen, but we're not sure yet if it's actually going to happen. A lot of lobbying, a lot of things going on to try to make sure it doesn't happen. But we have to plan as if it's going to happen. And that would be putting a 2.5 year look back on community Medicaid, but I'll let Ken explain how the look back works. So you'll see it's 2.5 for home care, 5 for nursing home.
So the way the look back works is Medicaid is essentially looking for a reason to deny the applicant's request for benefits. And what are they looking for? They're looking for really gifts or transfers made during the look back period. And based upon the size of that transfer, they will calculate a period of ineligibility for benefits. And that's what we call a penalty period. Okay. And so someone had a great question in the Q&A, and it says, for nursing home applications, if the applicant hasn't paid a caregiver off the books, has paid a caregiver off the books in cash, will that look like a transfer? And we see this quite often. The answer is yes. All right. And that's why for the look back period, everything has to be documented. All the money coming in, all the money going out, because they're also going to request verification of deposits. All right. Why deposits? They're looking for any sources of income that they can use to offset their own obligation, Medicaid's own obligation to the applicant. So as far as that question is concerned, that is a big problem. The only way that we can really address it is finding that home health aide and having them sign an affidavit attesting to the fact that they worked in this capacity for X amount of months or years. They received X amount of dollars in cash, however it was, weekly, monthly, etc., and that they provided these services. All right. But as far as the look back period as a whole, everything has to be addressed. So even gifts to family members, and let's say if those gifts are a bit above and beyond the norm, a $5,000 birthday gift, $1,000 a year, everything has to be explained, or they're going to impose a penalty period. Now, there are ways to counteract this. One of it is a pattern of gifting. So if before that 5-year look back, mom or dad would give $2,000 or $3,000 or $5,000 a year to all of their kids, and we see that 7 years ago, not just within the 5 years, then we can show a pattern of gifting that would offset that penalty period. But without producing all of the documentation and explaining any transfers to make sure that they were compensated, that they were value received, or that they fall into the exempt category that I talked about earlier, then a penalty period will be issued by the Department of Social Services, who administers the Medicaid program, and the applicant is in a bad way as far as having the care at the nursing home paid.
And Elizabeth, that's why the planning is so important, because when we are working with a family that's in a crisis and we're looking back 5 years and we're saying, oh, this is a problem, this is a problem, this is a problem, and how are we going to fix it? As opposed to sitting with a family who says to me, we have somebody in the house now, but we're paying them cash. Well, I could tell them, listen, start a logbook, start a receipt book, make sure you know when the aid worked, who it was, ask them if they'll sign a receipt, things like that. Obviously, telling them they should be paying them on the books, but if they choose to continue that process, they need to document. Like Ken said, it's much easier to document as you go than to try to figure everything out and remember, what, who, when, and where. So that is another reason why kind of getting ahead of these things is so important.
Absolutely. I mean, I think if the one thing that everyone takes from this webinar is reach out and just have a conversation with you all about this now, whether you're in need or not, is the most critical thing, because every day behind you is a day lost that you could have been planning and making sure you're doing the right thing for yourself and your loved ones. So, I always get like an anxiety feeling of like, hurry up and call them, because really every day can be a huge difference. So let me just ask you, Ken, you mentioned about the penalty period. So let's say there is a penalty period. What exactly does that mean?
It means that Medicaid will not pay for a specified period of time. So like I said, based upon the size of the transfer, they'll calculate how many months this person is ineligible for benefits. All right. So in order to even apply for Medicaid in a nursing home, the person has to be in a nursing home and has to be otherwise eligible. So their assets have to be below that 28,133 mark. All right. So if during the processing of the application, Medicaid finds, let's just say $100,000 in transfers that are either unexplained or were just straight gifts, they'll assess let's say a penalty period of about 8 months on that. Okay. And that means that for 8 months that this person's in the nursing home, they have no payment source to cover the cost of their care. And that's obviously a big problem.
That's very frightening for sure, and very overwhelming for you and your family and for your loved ones. I've heard about promissory note plans. Can you speak to what that is?
Sure.
Sure.
You want me to do it, or you got it? So when somebody comes to us in a situation where there's no spouse, Ken mentioned earlier that there are transfers that are exempt. So when you have a married couple, we can move assets to the spouse and get someone on Medicaid right away, get the other spouse on Medicaid right away. When you have a single individual who hasn't done any planning, they're in the nursing home, their Medicare coverage is about to run out, but they're sitting with $400,000 in assets, and the family, hopefully someone will say, go talk to a lawyer, and not just, you have to spend all their money down before you can qualify for Medicaid, because that's not the case. So even in that kind of crisis situation where there hasn't been any planning done, we can still preserve about half of the assets. We can still do this type of plan where we transfer all of the assets out of the applicant's name, because as Ken said, you have to be in the nursing home and below that resource limit in order for the penalty to even start ticking. So we need to move everything out. But Medicaid can only assess a penalty on a gift. So we have to show Medicaid half of that transfer approximately is not a gift, but a loan. And we do that with the person who received it signing a promissory note that they're going to return money every month, certain amount, certain number of months. There's a lot of specifics that have to be in that promissory note for it to work. And so Medicaid will only assess a penalty on, in my example, $200,000 versus the $400,000 that actually got transferred. So now we have a smaller penalty period and we have a source of payment because we have the loan repayments coming in, right? So when the loan repayments run out after the last one is made, we should be at the end of the penalty period, at which point we can get the person on Medicaid. So it's a way of kind of planning with people who are in that crisis mode where there's been no planning done. But there are so many things that people need to make sure they have in place, because we can't do a promissory note for someone if there's no good power of attorney, because we have no way to move the assets. Then we have to go into guardianship land where we have to get a court to approve the plan and everything else. So we always have to make sure there's a good power of attorney that gives gifting powers and transfer powers and trust powers and, you know, all the things that kind of go into doing this promissory note. So it's a bit of a beast, but it is a way of making sure that we don't spend every single penny down before getting somebody on Medicaid.
And Melissa and Ken spend their days taming the beast. So you're in good hands to be able to deal with it, because it can be incredibly overwhelming. So you were talking about a single person. What about if there's a spouse? And can you talk about spousal refusal and you know, when it might be necessary and what that is?
Go ahead. You want to take this one? Go ahead.
So in a situation where the spouse has their assets are too much, okay, because Medicaid is looking at the institutionalized spouse to make sure their assets are at that $28,000 mark. But then if the person's married, they're also looking at the married person's assets as well, okay? So if their assets exceed a certain mark, then they have to sign a spousal refusal. Okay, and all that means is that they're saying, I'm not making my assets available to my spouse for their medical care. All right. What does that mean as far as the application is concerned? Not all that much. It's still processed like your normal Medicaid application. But one thing that we do have to keep in mind, whether there's spousal refusal or not, when a couple is applying, when a person is applying for nursing home and they're married, the Department of Social Services Medicaid also looks at any transfers made by the well spouse. It's not just the transfers that were made by the applicant. So if, you know, and sometimes couples, obviously many do have separate accounts. If they're making gifts, let's say to children from a previous marriage, that's going to affect the spouse in the nursing home's Medicaid eligibility. All right. As far as the effects, it depends on the county. Most counties, especially here in Long Island, it has very little effect, even on the well spouse's ability to receive some of the income if they needed to bring them up to that income allowance in the community, that 37-15-50 we talked about earlier. But an important thing to note is that if we're talking about a situation where, let's say, planning hasn't been done, or maybe planning was done, right? But they didn't make the 5-year clock. And now we have to regroup by bringing the assets back into the applicant and their spouse's name, and then transferring the assets to the well spouse. All right. That's all well and good. The assets will still be protected. But what we need to do is next step planning once the nursing home application is approved for the institutionalized spouse. Well, why is that? Because if that spouse, the well spouse who now has all the money, passes away with that money in their name, and it's going through their estate, then Medicaid will have a lien against the well spouse's estate for monies expended on their institutionalized spouse's care. All right. So the step in a situation like this is, if we're transferring assets to a well spouse, that spouse, about 30 or 60 days after the institutionalized spouse's Medicaid is approved, needs to do their own planning and get that money out and transferred into a trust, all right, to protect their assets in the event they pass away, right? Medicaid is a priority creditor. And what does that mean? Is that, let's say, after the IRS and banks, Medicaid takes before anybody else. And Medicaid is expending a serious amount of dollars for just about everybody in those nursing homes. So if they're expending, if it's a $10,000 a month reimbursement rate, and the applicant's income is $2,000, Medicaid's paying $8,000 a month, and that adds up quick. So that's a serious lien against someone's estate. So next step planning always must be considered and should be acted on immediately.
It's almost like a family situation. You really should think about coming in with your family and this plan for everyone, because the truth is we never know. We never know what the future holds. And I think if COVID taught us anything, it was you could plan if you plan ahead, you can be much more protected and save yourself a lot of grief and agony that isn't necessary. So
I'll just give you the exact number for when you have to file a spousal refusal. It's $148,620. Anything above that or above a spousal refusal has to be signed.
Got it. Thank you for that. So can you share with us some of the Medicaid home care options and how they're coordinated?
What do you mean by options?
So, what in terms of your home care, what would be the next step? Like if someone needs help, how do they know, what kind of care and, where should they go from there?
Okay.
I guess really what should be the first step? So they come to you and because I think really the first step is kind of setting up this protective, I think of it as a protective shell, really, right. Before making any decisions. So maybe you could kind of walk us through those steps.
Sure. I mean, there's really two pieces to the puzzle here. There's the financial and the medical. So when we first meet with, typically it's the adult children, maybe the spouse, we want to talk about what the assets are and how to get somebody eligible for community Medicaid, but we also want to talk about the medical piece because we run into a lot of problems where, there's a couple of things that come up, but Medicaid doesn't pay for supervision. Okay, so if somebody doesn't need hands-on assistance, but the family is afraid they're going to leave the stove on, Medicaid is not going to pay for somebody to just be there to make sure that they don't leave the stove on if they can do everything else on their own. So we want to make sure that they can really do everything else on their own. So this is kind of the psychology piece of our job. People as an adult child, and I'm in this situation right now, my parents are older, you don't want to say things like, my mom can't put her clothes on, my dad can't use the bathroom. It's difficult to wrap your head around. It's even more difficult to say out loud. And as I speak to families, more and more comes out, right? Because they'll say, yeah, my dad can dress himself. And then I'll ask more questions. Does he wear what he normally wears? No, he wears sweatsuits. Does he change them? Well, sometimes he's in the same one a couple of days and yeah, it'll be dirty. That's because he can't dress himself, right? So it's difficult for people to kind of make peace with that. And so that's part of the initial discussion, because I'm not going to put somebody through this whole process, just have Medicaid come in and say, we can't give this person any hours, right? So that's kind of the first conversation. The financial piece of getting somebody eligible for community Medicaid right now, because we don't have a look back, is really not that difficult. We have a spouse, we can transfer to the spouse. If we don't have a spouse, we can transfer to an irrevocable trust. Like I said, every case is different, but we just know we have to move these assets. There's no penalties right now for doing so. And how are we going to do it? What's the best way for this particular family? Once that's done, we submit an application to the Department of Social Services. We wait for an approval. Once we get the approval, then the first step after that is making an appointment for an assessment with New York State. New York State is going to be the first ones to come in and say, this person needs Medicaid or they don't. They need home care or they don't. This comes from years and years ago when there were agencies that were putting in cases that people really didn't need the care and the agencies were getting paid. So now this is kind of the oversight of, the state kind of coming in and saying, okay, this is legit or it's not. Once that's done, then we have to get assessments done by a managed long-term care plan. That's the insurance company, the middleman. that's going to basically pay the agency. They're going to get paid by Medicaid, and then they're going to pay the agency for the aid. We typically recommend 3 different managed long-term care plan assessments because you want to get the most hours possible. And some agencies will give more hours than others. Some managed care plans will give more hours than others. So there's a lot of assessments going on, okay? And these assessments are super important to the whole process, and making sure there's a family member there is very important because, sure, I can walk across the room and mom gets up and, whatever. I don't need any help. I can do all that by myself. Like Ken said, looking for reasons not to approve. So if you have someone who's going to say, I am totally fine and I can do everything on my own, they're going to be like, all right, we're not going to give any coverage. So we want a family member there to kind of make sure that what's really going on is getting across to the person doing the assessment. Once those assessments come back and they say, okay, we're going to give you 4 hours, or we're going to give you 8 hours, or we're going to give you 12 hours, or we're going to give you a live-in, then we have to work on staffing the case with an agency that works with that particular managed long-term care plan. So sometimes I think it's better for people to back into it, find an agency that accepts Medicaid, find an aid that you like, have the aid, being paid privately during the process. And then once they switch over to Medicaid, you can just ease right into the same aid, using the same aid and the same agency. Sometimes that's easier than starting from the beginning and going through all these steps and then maybe not being able to find an aid. So it's a process. It is definitely a process.
And it's one you don't want to do on your own.
No.
So, this has been so important. Literally, we could stay here all morning, but I have so many questions. I'd like to be able to get to some of them today. And I did share both of your contact information as well as your Cona eligible website and main number so that everyone can reach out. And I really encourage you, someone asked here, what if you're in the preventative planning stage? What do you do now? And what would you say? What would you say to someone who's in that position right now?
When you say preventative planning, I'm not sure.
It sounds like she's in a situation where she doesn't have someone who's in need right now. So this is kind of the planning that we're talking about,
Right.
Coming and speaking to you to get everything in order. So when that does happen, Sandy wants to know, how early should one begin planning?
Sooner the better.
The sooner the better. We always say you're never too young, you're never too old, you're never too rich, you're never too poor to plan. There's always a plan, whether it's for long-term care purposes or tax purposes or whatever the case might be. The ideal situation would be if and when the time comes that somebody needs the care, we're already eligible, we're already kind of, have our heads wrapped around what we have to do next, and we just go. As opposed to being in crisis, because when people are in crisis, they're emotional, right? And it's a whole different ballgame.
Yes, thank you for that. So let me jump into some more of these questions. We have a question here from Richie. Can Medicaid place a lien on the applicant's primary residence?
Absolutely. So if there's no exempt transfer available, then and the applicant owns a home, we're applying for nursing home care, the applicant can sign what's called an intent to return home. All right, and it's a very simple document, and it just says I live at 12 Elm Street in Smithtown, and I firmly intend to return to my home. It is based on subjective intent, which means that person, based on their condition, there could be no way they could safely go home. But because they've expressed that they want to go home, Medicaid will say, I'm not going to count this asset against your Medicaid eligibility. I'm going to pretend like it's not there, but I am going to put a lien on it. Okay. And that lien is going to grow for every dollar I expend on your care. All right. So what's the benefit to this? Well, instead of having to sell the house, if the person doesn't want to, and pay the nursing home, they can just sign this piece of paper, get on benefits. And keep in mind that what the nursing home charges for someone who's not on Medicaid, what they call the private pay rate, is significantly more, thousands and thousands of dollars more a month than what Medicaid pays that nursing home when we have a Medicaid recipient in that bed. Okay.
Wow.
So if the person does actually go home, that lien is extinguished. It's removed by the Department of Social Services. All right. But if they pass away in the nursing home and that asset goes to their estate, as it would under these circumstances, then that Medicaid lien would have to be paid off.
Thank you for that. Did you want to say something, Melissa?
Nope, no.
Someone wants to know, and this, of course, is probably hard to answer, but how long does the process take from start to finish for nursing home Medicaid or community Medicaid?
Every application is different. So you can have a person who's applying and has had 3 accounts within the last 5 years. And then we've seen people apply and they have 37 accounts in the last 5 years. And because every transaction has to be tracked, those 37 accounts, right, it's going to take a whole lot longer than managing those 3 accounts.
Right.
And also the availability of the documentation. And if they're all open accounts, likely easier. If some of those are closed, it may be more difficult to obtain those statements from the financial institution.
Got it.
And then once it gets to the Department of Social Services, it's whose desk does it land on? How busy are they? How backed up are they? We've seen it all. People have, gotten almost through our entire case and then quit. And then it goes to another caseworker and they start all over again. So some of it is very much out of our hands.
But no matter how long it takes to process the application, once you file the application, that draws the line in the sand. So let's just say the person has 70 accounts, the caseworker quits, and it takes a year for them to issue a decision. If the application is approved from day one, let's assume there's no transfers that would render this person ineligible for benefits. The Medicaid eligibility date, meaning the date that Medicaid is going to pay, is going to go all the way back to that application date. And if the person needs it, 3 months before that, in fact. All right. So it doesn't matter how long the application date takes, it matters when the application is filed. What process it takes.
And that's for nursing home. Unfortunately, for
Yes.
community Medicaid, they don't pay retroactive. So those are the ones we kind of want to, really, really get moving as quickly as possible. But the retroactive payment to the nursing homes is helpful. And people, besides the net available monthly income that Ken mentioned earlier, you're not paying out of pocket while you're waiting for Medicaid to make their decision.
Thank you for that. Senja wanted to know, does Cona Elder Law work with residents from Brooklyn? And what is your area of work, what you could help people? Is it all of New York?
All of New York.
All of New York. Yeah.
Wonderful. So from Manhattan to Buffalo and beyond.
Chemung County, which I can't find on a map, but we service. Yeah.
Perfect. So someone wants to know, what about domestic partners? Someone who isn't married legally. What are the laws around that? And do they need to set up the same sort of, protections?
Well, they don't have the ability to utilize the spousal exemption unless they're married. So they would have to do planning, kind of as 2 individuals, with gifting and transfers, because they're going to be subject to penalty periods and things like that, even if they're moving money between each other.
Got it. Thank you. Joyce wants to know, what about assets in a foreign country? Does
In
it
play.
count? Say it again?
Totally in play. Completely in play.
Okay.
Just because if you own property abroad or whatever that asset might be, it is factored into your resources when you apply for Medicaid.
Even timeshares are that's why we need to know everything when we sit down with a family.
Great. And those are the questions that you ask that we may not even think of to talk about, which is so. I've gotten a few questions that have kind of a similar twist, which is, if someone is already in an assisted living or a rehab, or if they're already in a care facility, Does that expedite the situation? Does that not have any impact on the situation? Does it slow the situation? How does that have an impact on being able to get coverage?
It depends on what kind of facility. So there are what we call ALP facilities, which are assisted living facilities that accept Medicaid. They accept home care. It's a home care based Medicaid benefit that will pay for that assisted living facility. So as far as transitioning from home care, if you're already receiving benefits to nursing home care, right now, because there's no look back period for home care, it's, all your personal docs are on file, but you're still going to have to do the 5-year look back if you transition to nursing home care. All right. So it's still going to be that arduous process of documenting everything. So it helps you a little bit, but not all that much right now. Now, if home care transitions to that 2.5-year look back, that'll help us a little bit more. But keep in mind, you may do a 2.5 look back for home care, go 2.5 years, and then go into the nursing home. And we have to file institutional, it's called a conversion application. I'm converting my home care benefits to institutional benefits. And then it's going to be 5 years from when you're asking them to pay for the nursing home care. All right. But again, your personal docs are on file. A little bit helps.
Got it. Thank you. So, Sandy wants to know, do you work with clients, other professionals, such as like their tax person, anyone else that they work with to coordinate all these financial decisions?
Absolutely. We work with accountants, we'll work with the financial planner, we'll work with a social worker or a geriatric care manager, anybody that they kind of have, brought on board or have on board, and they want us to speak with. We're happy to coordinate with them. We always think a team of trusted advisors is the ideal situation, and it'll, help result in the best plan.
Fantastic. So tell me the next steps that someone should take. I shared the phone number and your emails. What does the next step look like? They call.
We do offer a free consultation. Somebody had asked that question. We offer a free consultation. If you call the office to schedule an appointment, we'll schedule an appointment. It can be via Zoom if you'd like, although we are definitely seeing people more in the office now. We are in Melville and we're also in Port Jefferson. And we will send you a questionnaire depending on what type of situation you have going on, whether it's an immediate Medicaid situation, or it's a nursing home Medicaid situation, or a planning situation. We will send you a questionnaire to help guide you in what you need to put together to get to that first meeting. Whether you send it to us and we Zoom or you bring it with you, because the more information we have at the outset, obviously, the faster we can come up with a plan and we can start moving. So at the consultation, if you choose to go forward, we take it from there, depending on what kind of work we're doing. Some people need to go talk to their family and then come back, or whatever the case may be. But that initial meeting will give you an idea of exactly what you're going to need to do to either start planning or become eligible right away, depending on the situation.
Fantastic. Fantastic. Well, I'm sharing your information right here. As I shared with everyone, you will also get a recording of this to be able to watch again and be able to share with your community. Ken and Melissa, I can't thank you enough. I know there's a million questions. We could be here all day, but I really encourage you all to reach out to them because everyone's situation is different, and be able to at least plan, no matter what stage that you're at. Planning is an important piece, and at least a conversation. So Melissa and Ken, thank you so much for spending so much time with us and giving us so much valuable information. Thank you so much to all of our attendees for joining us. I hope that this was valuable, and I hope that you get on your planning right away, and so that this is a burden taken off of your shoulders all by yourself. So I wish you all to stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll look forward to seeing you on a future webinar. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks. Have a great day.
Thank you.